Documentation is a real big part of governance, risk, and compliance. If you can be a part of the risk portion, that's the auditing, assessments. If you can jump in whenever those assessments are happening. If you've been doing IT for any amount of time, you've gotten exposure to a lot of the best security practices. If you understand how those benefit the organization, because from a GRC perspective, we have to look at things from a bigger picture. It's not just in the weeds doing one thing. We're not playing whack-a-mole all day. We are looking at the big picture. So that's documentation, that's continuous monitoring. You want to be a part of those types of things. And the more you can put that stuff you can put on your resume, the more it's going to help you out. And I want to, it actually a segue into another question I have for Will, which is about what is your approach to risk management in an organization? What kind of frameworks and tools do you use? Because this is another thing that can help you to get into GRC if you happen to be in IT.
Yeah, great question. And one of my go-tos is the NIST cybersecurity framework. I think that one is a framework that allows you to scale regardless of the organization size. So that it's applicable for organizations that don't have a security program, that are small, but also to bigger enterprises, right? And so that's one of the ones where it has maturity levels baked into it, to where like you might start off at a level 0-1 where you don't have any documentation, you don't have no risk assessment, no information security policies, no information security personnel, no incident response plan, no third-party risk management. You don't have any of that stuff. In this cybersecurity framework gives you the ability to not only identify where the gaps are, but also if you start going through each one of those functions, then it helps you build out your security program. And then, so that's one. So that's the framework I use. Mm-hmm. And then the approach to risk management is, once you've identified what those gaps are, once you've identified different vulnerabilities, once you identify where your organization may be lacking in certain implementation, I also recommend prioritizing and categorizing your risk. So starting with the most critical risk and the low-hanging fruit, those two things, and then working your way down. So categorizing your risk. Hey, what's the difference between something that is low risk versus critical, right? It's something, I'll give you an example. If you have a vulnerability, if anybody's familiar with the CVEs, a lot, like 2 or 3 times a week, you'll get a new CVE. There's a new vulnerability that has been identified. It means that somebody can do some remote code execution, which means they can go from their workstation and then somehow get into another network without having to actually execute code and commands on a network. And a lot of times without authentication. Okay, unauthenticated code, remote code execution, right? And so that's a vulnerability, and it's with Microsoft Windows Server 2012 or 2016. And then it'll usually come with a remediation recommendation. And it'll give it a rating, right? And so that rating, remote code execution, especially if it's being remote code execution unauthenticated, that's usually like a 9.8. So that's out of a scale of 1 to 10, that's pretty bad. And so that's where you go, hey, if we have that in our organization, we are running Windows Server 2012 in our organization, we need to jump on this and make sure that we get this patched immediately. That's critical. And especially if that's, for example, a lot of Windows servers are doing authentication, or you might be hosting a VPN service or a web-based service that is hosting a website or something like that. If it's public facing, you need to jump on that immediately. That means anybody can hit your server and then has a vulnerability. Like, jump on that immediately, stop what you're doing. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go straight to fix that. But if you have something that's maybe an internal workstation where maybe you log in locally and the password is 8 character only, I only hit all lowercase letters and it's 8 characters. Okay, that's an issue, but that's not a major thing. It's not publicly facing. It's not hosting any major services. So when I weigh the two together, do I fix that externally facing server that has a 9.8 CVE vulnerability sitting on it? Or do I face what's considered a low risk on a workstation that's sitting on somebody's desk that probably only gets logged into 2 or 3 times a week or something like that? It's internally facing, not hosting anything. That's a low risk. I'm going to start with the critical, and then I'm going to work my way down. And then eventually I'm going to get to the lows if I have time. But what I know is, whatever I had time to, and this is really critical too, when it comes to risk management, it is the availability of resources to accomplish the risk mediation task. So an IT team, especially when you're talking about small business, usually a lot of times there isn't a security practitioner that is dedicated to security, right? Usually it's an IT guy or two or three guys that also have to do security on top of all their IT and infrastructure support. So their ability to have enough time to address all vulnerabilities, all risks from an IT perspective and from a security perspective is really limited. So you have to prioritize things so that you're hitting what's the most risk, what's the biggest impact, what is going to impact my business the most, and start there. And then if I eventually get to some of those other things that are lower risk, I do great. That's all great. But at least I focus on the things that matter.
Absolutely. Prioritization is huge. And you basically have to, especially the more risks that you have, the more systems, more assets you have, the bigger the organization, the more you absolutely have to prioritize. It's a must.